I've got some bad tasting medicine no one's really going to like, and it really is only aimed at about 3 dozen people. But anyway, down the hatch. Today I'm going to teach you exactly how to become a rich and famous political commentator online. You ready? This is the ratings cheat code, tried and true. All you'll need is this mic. Preferably don't set it up correctly so the audio sounds like this. See yourself overlaid in front of an article for the rest of your life. Then just repeat these magic words forever. You ready? Everything the government does sucks. You got that? Everything. No matter who it is or what they do, it sucks. Now, you might be tempted to think surely there's some mitigating circumstances like, say, a global cost of living crisis. Don't be naive. Understand your audience. The politically engaged online youth market, they're not looking to be educated. They're looking to be hooked up with the latest flavour of depression heroin. Gen X had the Smashing Pumpkins, Gen Y had Vice. The Zoomers have got some with one of these mics that would have been working at Vice if they were part of Gen Y, saying over and over, steak costs more than it used to. I can't believe complaining about the exact things 80-year-olds complain about on AM radio. That's the new grunge. As a result, if you ever feel tempted to explain that, hang on, this government did do one of the most extensive cost of living relief packages on earth. It ranged from energy rebates to passing legislation to stop supermarkets from price gouging to passing wage increases that have led to workers experiencing the biggest upward trend in the national share of profits since the last time Labor was in government. Fancy that. Oh no, you're losing them. They're getting Whinge withdrawals. Quick, you're gonna have to give your audience 500 cc's off. It's not good enough. Oh, thank God, for a second I thought we lost you. Seriously, streamers, you have to learn this. If you ever stop dealing depression heroin, you'll soon realize, much like actual heroin dealers, your customers don't really want to watch you play video games in the middle of the day. They need their fix. This is why from time to time you're gonna have to employ a little technique I like to call chasing the dragon. If you are ever on the verge of being forced to admit that a piece of legislation that the government passed is good, begin sharing tales of a far-off mythical land, Norway. Perfect, because our images of it are heavily influenced by our closest referential experience of attending a Santa's workshop in a Westfield. Why, right now, their President Elf is about to address all the centaurs and huldras of the fjord. Good news in Hagen, my fellow Norwegians. During the global cost of living crisis, prices went down in Husen up here in Husen. Yay! Now we can afford to make everything out of chocolate, even our turds. Look, they're picnic bars now. I'll demonstrate. Oh. Just so you know, Norway, being part of the globe, was also touched by the global cost of living crisis. Oh, eat shit. That's good shit. But that's okay. Even if they are facing the same problem your country's facing, there's always some country to island hop to that's better in that one specific area you're complaining about. Oh, Singapore has more publicly owned housing. Qatar gets more money for its resources. What the fuck? Some Austrian cities have better rent controls. Tanzania has more of those freakishly tall that jump really high and can be used by our Olympic athletes as extra springy poles in the pole vault so that we can prevent this tragedy from repeating itself. Never mention the contextual and historically unique circumstances that allowed these countries to excel in that one specific field, because that would defeat the entire purpose of having this perpetual spoiled child tantrum of, but Germany has it! And that purpose is to hold your country to this literally impossible standard of being able to Frankenstein this handful of freak programs that quite often had centuries to mature with completely different political circumstances. You know, like you're just grabbing some cereal at the supermarket. Oh yes, some Middle Eastern gas policy, why not? And oh, what's this? Some European housing programs in cities that have been around specifically since the Middle Ages, why not? Ta-da! Purely so you can pretend that whatever you're talking about is not good enough. Never mention that in these countries, their commentators would be using Australia as the impossible imagined dragon that they're chasing. That is, even if they have commentators, as a lot of these countries that are held up as shining examples to duplicate were only able to implement these programs because they were quasi to full-blown dictatorships. But don't ever explain any of that ever, okay? If you did, you could never continue to, and this is the magic key to growth on social media. You ready? Write this down. Bitch. Exact same formula as the YouTube drama channels. You follow the bandwagon like you're this fish at the bottom of a shark. The shark is Murdoch. You wait for it to tear this poor defenseless manatee to pieces, and you pull that carcass in whatever direction your audience is inclined to agree with. You want the cheat sheet? I'm telling you, I'm giving it all away today. If you're appealing to One Nation voters, the answer is always
fucking migrants.
If it's the Greens, it's
King neoliberalism.
Don't worry, they don't know what it means either. They just use it to categorise anything they don't understand that gives them bad vibes. It's the human equivalent of a dog entering a vet. They use it like the word witchcraft was used back in the day, which they probably still would be using if it wasn't for the fact that they're not allowed to like Harry Potter anymore. But the true masters of online commentary, they will soon learn that the way to bring both breeds of pig goblin to their trough, regardless of their preferred ideologically flavoured slop, they'll all happily gorge on drum roll. Both major parties are corrupt. 9 out of 10 pig goblins can't tell the difference. You know how middle class women like to fantasise that,
oh, I live in the handmaid's tale. I'm so oppressed.
the male equivalent of that seems to be,
I mean, sometimes I feel like I live in India, mate. So fucking corrupt. See, someone just shat in the streets over there. But keep in mind, I do live in Newcastle, so that is to be expected.
now be warned, you doing your best impression of the Mr. Beast's I said Logan Paul's name 100,000 times video. Corrupt, 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 corrupt. It's not like Lisa Wilkinson quoting The Handmaid's Tale. You can absolutely Candyman that shit into reality. It's always just a couple of parliamentary seats away. To quote former Queensland Premier Sir Joe, don't you worry about that. Who's Sir Joe? Well, I was expecting I'd need to do a BuzzFeed-esque 90s kids won't remember this, but after looking at my demo, it'd probably be more appropriate to do a 2000s kids won't remember BuzzFeed. Thank fuck for that too. Paying the shit out of anyone that worked there was our norm. But to be honest, doesn't seem like boomers remember Joe Bioki Peterson either. Too many drunken punch-ons in Fortitude Valley in the 80s to remember that for nearly 20 years you did have a government that actually did bring about previously unheard of levels of corruption. Everything from bribing cops to unbelievably fucked development approvals. You want a source for that? Here's one. The entire Gold Coast.
It was a dream world for the mob, I'll tell you that.
The entire judiciary system was bought. So it really was like Thailand. You got your fondest wish. You did live in a corrupt shithole. Well done. You know, Australians have this stupid idea planted in their heads that, yeah, well, that's what happens when they're in too long, mate. You just got to vote them out. You couldn't. He drew up the map in such a way that it became impossible to vote him out. The LNP under Sir Joe perfected the art of gerrymandering to the point that they had to give it its own name. You know how there's like Leninism and Stalinism? ScoMoism, that's the act of shitting yourself in a time of crisis. Well, Joe Bioki was so good at gerrymandering that he now has his own Wikipedia page on Bioki Mandering. Think about that. That means that he was at least as good at wrangling power as fucking Lenin. Then, as is standard practice with state Liberal governments, the LNP introduced their own little Stasi, similar to what we personally had to put up with in New South Wales, but much like everything else,
Queensland does it better.
See, a big part of why you think New South Wales was bad is because we live in the age of iPhones. But remember, the police in Queensland weren't the slightest bit fussed about openly, right in front of the cameras.
Yeah, just another day on the force. Fuck, I love my job. Hi, ma'am.
Imagine what they were doing when the cameras were off. Using said cameras to surveil the opposition, mostly. I've spoken to people off the record who remember it well. They were treating the parliamentary opposition like they were just YouTubers, frankly. Tracking them, bugging them, MPs. That's the shit that got Nixon impeached. Queensland Labor had to endure their own Watergate. It's just that their Watergate lasted 20 years. Do you have any idea how fucked that is? What these genius commentators are equating is a party with the proven behaviour of straight up presidentes for life. Spying on the opposition is what they do in countries like Rwanda and Cambodia. They are pretending that that is the same as a party that spent the next 30 years cleaning that shit up. I mean, Jesus Christ. Drew gave me the moniker of an ungrateful tanky pig. How's the ego? It's like they think it's not hard at all, like if they saw Modi in a food court.
Oi, Modi!
Huh?
Just get rid of all the corrupt in India, eh?
Just get rid of all the corrupt c***s. Why didn't I think of that? Because eliminating corruption in the real world isn't like burning off a skin cancer. It's treating leukemia. It takes a highly skilled specialist, and Queensland was very lucky to have one in Tony Fitzgerald, who, that man honestly deserves to be held up as a national hero along with the likes of Shane Warne and the donkey. He spent years of his life gathering evidence of the LNP's corruption, which is kind of the thing about real corruption as opposed to the corruption you just vibe is there. There's actual evidence for it. 400 pages of it, in fact, plain black and white. Everything from bribing public officials to the police having deep links to organised crime. That takes real grit to expose. You just saying, okay guys, we're doing a corruption tier list today. I'm putting every politician ever on S tier because why would you become a politician if you weren't S tier corrupt? Fuck, I've got another 8 minutes to pad. National hero. That makes a complete mockery of what people like Tony Fitzgerald sacrificed for this country. It makes it sound like it was nothing that he did such a detailed structural analysis of what was broken in Queensland that he came up with 100 recommendations to clean it up, that were all acted on by yet another man that deserves to be canonised to Australian folklore, Barnaby Joyce. Well, he does. Come on, as a palate cleanser, how good was the meme of putting drunk Barnaby in classic art? No, it was Labor Premier Wayne Goss. He had the unenviable task of actually having to implement Fitzgerald's recommendations, which to do that, he had to first discover and traverse the glitch in the matrix that broke the Bioki Meander. So think about that. Giving you back a functioning democracy is just a side note to the accomplishments of this shit-light man, which is amazing, because if you ask these c***s who their hero is, independent senator and thinker, David Pocock. He played rugby and has a stare as blank as mine. If it wasn't for Goss, Queensland would absolutely be like Lebanon or Turkey today, where it's just part of the culture that it's corrupt. It's perfectly acceptable that the entire point of winning an election is that, yes, my brothers in, time to get the fate of government contracts. Take it, cousin Yazis. Jace! It can happen. You could see this old world mentality seeping into New South Wales with John and Gladys, openly admitting, yeah, we're pockbarrel to get ourselves elected, that's hectic.
You can have it all in New South Wales, you can have it all.
They didn't see a problem with it. Do you understand how fucked that is? Do you understand why it's scary that John's corruption case with me was him essentially arguing in court without a hint of bashfulness, saying I'm corrupt is racist cause it's making fun of my people's way of life, Stooge? I can guarantee you that any of these both sides are corrupt commentators would be far too incompetent to even file a proper fucking report to ICAC, let alone read an entire state apparatus of bureaucratic rot. That level of public service should be as honoured as the Anzacs, and instead we have these cunts pretending on TikTok that the party that delivered Queensland from the fate of being a far more expensive barley is shit light. What? I said shit light, not shit. Understand the nuance of my argument. No, f*** you, I'm still putting on S tier. Now what's that I hear getting typed? The inevitable Labor used to be good, but now it's corrupt? Good, future streamers, you're learning. If you can't find a place in time. Unfortunately, the they used to be good argument is a little difficult to make these days by the fact that Labor stubbornly continues to fight corruption. I know, we truly live in the worst timeline. Federal Labor introduced a national corruption watchdog, so to keep your audience doped up on depression heroin, you're really going to have to foster this feeling of betrayal that Labor fulfilling its election promise of setting up a federal corruption commission is somehow a broken promise, as you assumed that was all code word for Chilean death squad. I thought the death squad was implied! Why is there so many C's in the abbreviation of the National Anti-Corruption Commission if one of them doesn't stand for Chile? I'll give you some stats that you can use to foster this sentiment, yeah? In the first year of operating, the National Anti-Corruption Commission had 3,189 corruption referrals, of which 90% were almost immediately canned, to which, look, the seagulls are already flocking. They think I'm about to throw them a chip. Aha! It's a chip with Panadol in it, This is SC Jeffrey Watson. He's a big wig who's done a lot of work with the New South Wales equivalent of the NAC, ICAC. Never noticed they rhymed. Knick-knack, ICAC, give a a go. Suffice to say, Mr. Watson's opinion is a little more weighty than your average psycho on Twitter, and you know what he thinks about that level of rejection?
They had over 2,700 complaints made. They've already dismissed 2,000. That's natural. I predicted that would occur.
Can vouch from my own far less qualified personal experience. An uncomfortable amount of our lives is devoted to hearing out boomers with the same generic delusion that they're Australia's James Bond. James Bond! Yeah, don't tell anyone I told you this, mate, but local council isn't in the Constitution. You don't have to pay your rates. I'm telling you, looking into 10% of those c***s is generous. Of what they looked into, 252 were investigated and nothing was found, to which these nutters are going to say, nothing was found because they didn't want to find anything. Yes, it couldn't be that it's completely normal for cases like Karen Chester's to be investigated and turn out that the allegations were baseless. Oh no, that would be too boring. 26 are ongoing with other agencies, a handful have led to prosecutions, and the rest are ongoing, of which quite a few are very high profile. So, sorry that gathering evidence in the real world takes a little longer than the detective shows you watch that are wrapped up in under an hour thanks to the teamwork of a dog and a ginger. Do you remember that show? Inspector Rex. So silly. Why wasn't it a kangaroo?
The brew takes over control.
Anyway, in the words of Jeffrey Watson,
We had in mind a wish list, including proper funding which would guarantee its independence. Wow, he came up with the money. No problems there.
So the people of Australia should be happy that this is happening now.
People of Australia should be saying sensibly, this is fantastic. We're so happy it's happening now. Why didn't it happen 10 years ago?
but these commentators who don't even understand what the NAC does know better. They know better than everyone from Watson to corruption scholar Professor AJ Brown to Transparency International, which is a huge endorsement, and therefore, unfortunately, it does make your job difficult to keep up the illusion that,
Oh, I can't tell the difference between this Thai cop and Bill Shorten. I assume that Bill Shorten, you can't barter with him. His price is set.
fortunately for you though, you don't have to think about these attack points that much, as there's entire think tanks who are inextricably linked to the Whinge economy who will do all the thinking for you. So naturally, after years of pining that we need a federal ICAC, as soon as they get one, they need something else to keep the holding them to account crowd donating. So watch this, they're gonna do it. It's not good enough. Bam! That's how it's done. Always remember, kids, experts are doing the fundamentals, they're just better at executing. So how are they going to prove that it's not good enough? Whoa, get ready, we're about to chase the dragon. The NAC doesn't have as many public hearings as the New South Wales counterpart. Wow, we didn't even have to leave the country this time, just went interstate. Good job, guys. I mean, I'm sure increased public hearings are a good idea. You gotta go with expert opinion. But the reason a bunch of them are saying it's important is because it supposedly gives the public assurance that behind closed doors, public servants aren't sleeping nude in an oxygen tent that they believe gives them corrupt powers. And perhaps that would fill that purpose if the average Dan Murphy's worker was running home.
Babe, the next corruption hearing on some public servant in some department we've never heard about is about to drop. Hurry the f*** up!
Knack and chill. They're not watching this shit. If the public remotely care about a case, and remember that is a big if, they're getting the highlights fed to them through this external House of Mirrors distortion factory whose entire business is character assassination. This channel has done a ton of examples of the press deliberately going out of their way to destroy someone's life, but because this is corruption themed, laptop gate. Fucking laptop gate. Now that was more of a reach from the Queensland press than the midget they're trying to install as premier trying to get on one of the rides at Movie World. This was the narrative echoed by the entire press for years that somewhere, deep in the public service, a laptop that Anastasia Palaszczuk knew nothing about, or so she claims, was factory reset. As is the standard procedure to reset any laptop anytime any public servant ever leaves a job. I mean, you know you're scraping the bottom of the barrel when the newspaper becomes indistinguishable from the JB Hi-Fi catalogue that falls out the middle of it. Years of laptops, laptops, laptops. Even when it was completely cleared by the Queensland Anti-Corruption Commission. Laptops, laptops, map flops, typo. Now you're going to say, well, if the press are going to do that, make the hearings public anyway. Oh, okay, so we should have just dumped Firestarter on the Black Summer bushfires instead of water. It's going to burn anyway. I know from personal experience how this works. When I was in court, any little word the judge uttered.
Did you order my sandwich for lunch? Tomato? This is inexcusable.
Inexcusable. Judge Blast confirmed racist Jordan Shanks for his pathological hatred of women.
Hey, that's the half-truth!
Conversely, if we take a trip back to the old rum colony where we have more public hearings, Gladys's was public, 9 Fairfax and the rest of the buzzards had access to it along with everyone who worked at Dan Murphy's. She was caught on tape saying,
I don't need to know about that bit.
giving over 15 mil in public money to her boyfriend. No questions asked. Did it matter? Course not. Left office with an extremely high approval rating, and why? Because they turned a story about obvious corruption into
Man.
Worst of all, and think about how truly damaging this is, because ICAC dared do its job and uncover facts, the press simply painted ICAC as corrupt. ICAC. This is the lens the public are viewing these hearings through. Stop pretending it's not. Stop pretending the public are even remotely interested in the finer details of these hearings, like say, are they innocent or guilty? They're just a lynch mob, too paralysed by their phones to do any lynching themselves, and are more than happy to follow the directions of this distortion factory as long as anyone gets hanged. Doesn't matter who.
This way, everyone. Anastasia Palaszczuk's corrupt.
What a dog.
Gladys Berejiklian is not corrupt. The watchdog is, yeah.
Not even a watchdog, just a dog.
Anyway, that's how you paint the picture that the NAC is a corruption laundering machine. You weaponise it because its designers had to account for it being weaponised. Well done. Here's another thing that you can do to be a good person. Take a respectable opinion like S.C. Watson's, who was obviously lugubrious that the NAC declined to investigate robo-debt, pointing out that this is one of the biggest corruption scandals in living memory, and so it should. Fair enough. The NAC's argument was that robo-debt had already been investigated by a royal commission that led to 6 potential prosecutions and was satisfied that that was enough evidence to prosecute. Therefore, it felt it would be allocating a large amount of resources to essentially checking the royal commission's homework. Mr. Watson argued that the NAC should check its homework, and then, because bureaucracy's hilarious, the NAC is now being investigated for refusing to investigate robo-debt. Now, if you were trying to be honest, which again, we're not trying to do that here, we're trying to tell our audience
Everything you thought immediately without thinking about it too much is correct. Sick, I knew I was a genius.
But if you were, you'd inform the public that that hilarious pattern of investigations about investigations is exactly what these arsehole commentators claim they want when they say, we need more transparency. That is what government transparency looks like. The Escher painting, except instead of staircases, it's endless hearings. But for your purposes, what you want to do instead is use the fact that no one follows this shit, because why would you, to fuel this conspiracy that because someone disagreed with one of the NAC's decisions, the NAC is secretly this false flag operation to throw the public off the scent of what's really going on, that Labor doesn't want a real corruption watchdog with real teeth looking into cases that heavily implicate their main opponents. What? Oh, sorry, that's right, I forgot their other conspiracy. Uni-party. That's right. Albo's scratching the back of Dutton, covering for the Libs by... I don't know how. The government doesn't have the power to direct the NAC to look into anything. If the government did have that power, it would defeat the entire purpose of having a corruption watchdog, which is that the corruption watchdog gets to independently decide what it looks into. Honestly, this is the Simpsons joke of, so you want an independent commission that has the power to look into whatever it likes... But when that independent commission doesn't look into what you like, you want the government to interfere, which would immediately render it not independent.
Good.
And also, if you don't do that, you're a neoliberal. Here's the real problem. When you have a government in that is functioning well, there aren't that many problems. That's the problem. Because you see, the game we're in, both new and old media, is a game of moans. Our product is moaning. I don't know if you remember the golden years, but I can tell you right now, it was a hell of a lot easier to find something to legitimately moan about under the Liberals. Everyone always wrote to me after every Labor loss.
Jodie's on suicide watch.
No, you don't understand. You want to make me happy? Vote Liberal. You should have seen me when Albo won. I was clearly thinking, fuck, how am I going to pay the bills? But it's cool. I'm happy to take the L. I'll trade less material for a sane government, but that's because I care about things like the facts and the direction of the country and doing a basic year 4 level of Googling, so I at least have a rudimentary understanding of what the fuck I'm complaining about. If you're not constrained by any of those limitations, doesn't matter who's in power, you can keep growing your sub count because you can make things up. NAC conspiracies, half conspiracies, all the same shit and shit light to you. You don't even have to bother thinking about your own extremely dishonest attack points, because if the think tanks do enough of your thinking for you, well, there's a place where the pastures are always green. Perfect catchphrase for them, isn't it? Grass is always greener. Either that or a bunch of opportunistic c***s, because when you've mastered the fundamentals of 1. Pretend everything sucks. 2. If challenge say it's not good enough. 3. Chase the dragon to prove it. When you get really good at the game of moans, you can flip it on its head, like what the Greens did during the CFMEU corruption scandal. Now, there's a true master of the art of whinging. Remember Max? Proud defender of those on Struggle Street until the cameras were no longer pointed at those on Struggle Street, at which point, later pov time for a costume change. Off comes the Obama community organizer look. On goes the CFMEU construction worker shirt. Now, surely that is cultural appropriation. I mean, guys, He's wearing black shirt, this twig, this soft-handed Beavis lookalike, acting hard, acting like he hangs out at a bar called the Punch Tooth Inn with the guy at the rally that looks like a snake. How could you ever jump to the conclusion that I might know a couple of bikies? Why was he there? First sentence, this is really important.
Well, for us, this is about principles, and the thing about principles is you should stick to them.
Principles, eh? Like shining a light on corruption? Does that ring a bell, Maxie? Wasn't that the narrative for years, that the reason the Greens are so much purer than the Majors is because the Majors are all like totally only there to serve their corrupt donors, yet as soon as corruption is exposed, and Labor clearly demonstrates that they're more than happy to come down on one of their biggest donors like the Hammer of Thor on a CFMEU-controlled construction site. Hey! He's doing the work of 10 men! Scab! Scab! All of a sudden, the Greens immediately switch their principle to how dare you go after corruption? Why? How? Well, as always, they're going to have their canned responses that they use to justify any of their tantrums. Ever heard this one?
This should worry you because Labor has set a precedent where Parliament can seize control of a civil society group that the government doesn't like and suspend their basic rights.
I mean, at least they stick to their principle of recycling. I'm genuinely curious about this one, though. How can you set a precedent for something that's already happened? Multiple times. In fact, not only have unions been put into administration in the past, they've been deregistered for links to organised crime, and the reason you put them into administration is to prevent them from being deregistered. But of course the Greens wouldn't understand that, as the Greens seem to think that administration is some sort of extra-legal concept up there with waterboarding, which to think that, you would have to legitimately not know that the Central Coast Council exists, Logan City Council, Geelong City Council. Jesus, all the satellite city shitholes, what a coincidence. Ipswich, oh no, there's some regular shitholes there. Port Macquarie, Tweed, even some of the hippie shitholes, compost holes. OneTel, HIH Insurance, AWB, ring a bell. Entities go under administration all the time, but good to know the people of Brisbane elected a goldfish. Oh my god, I'm being fed next to this plastic castle that I've never seen in my life. This is totally unprecedented, guys. Then they move on to this one, and this is honestly astonishing that him and his new media sycophants regurgitate this like it's a profound critique.
We have seen serious allegations made against all sorts of institutions in this country. We saw the devastating impact of the Banking Royal Commission, the impact that the banks had on people's lives. We've seen serious allegations made against previous institutions around systematic sexual abuse. We have seen serious allegations made time and again against institutions in this country, and never have we seen a piece of legislation like this. Why is it that this reaches the threshold to override natural justice and the rule of law, but all of those previous ones didn't?
I mean, yeah, boo banks and all, apart from the fact that you're pretending that Labor was in power when the Royal Commission came down, and also pretending that it wasn't them that came up with the idea in the first place. But I'll let that all slide so I can tell you the difference, Max. It's very simple. It's because in the Banking Royal Commission, it wasn't uncovered that the CEO of NAB was taking orders from the f***ing Comancheros. Like, seriously, I can't believe that it has gotten to the level where I even have to say that bikies being anywhere near a governing structure should not be tolerated. If you'd like an example as to why, I can't even point to one, even though the example is f***ing me. That's how serious organised crime is. And to explain why to their chronically online voters, I'll use the only political framework they have to understand the world in, Warhammer 40k. When organised crime infiltrates the orbit of a political organisation, it's like when there is a chaos incursion in the Imperium of Man to rid the realm of the... I can't believe it's actually called this in 40k. How amazing is this coincidence? Chaos, corruption. One must practice exterminatus. Now, Redditors watching this are obviously thinking, yeah, Labor are the dirty Imperium of men. The Greens are the Tau. No, the ACTU are the Tau. The Greens are the Tyranids, and Reddit are the Gene Stealer cult. These dumb psychos thinking that they're on the side of God by spreading the indoctrination to allow the Xeno to incubate. The vast majority of the union movement supported putting the CFMEU into administration for the greater good. They get it. They get it's bad that a bunch of CFMEU delegates were sacked that are probably innocent because it's the only way to be sure. It's not fair, it's not just, but what is in the grim, dark universe? Look, I'm a union guy. I've defended specifically the CFMEU in the past against flagrantly false allegations countless times. I'll be proud to do so in the future. I understand that what happened to them is heavy-handed, but I'm also glad that there is a government in place that has made it clear that they will not tolerate organised crime anywhere near them. That used to not be a controversial opinion either. Now it is, purely for political opportunism. The Greens are acting Like the cure is worse than the disease, and their piss poor reasoning for it is.
Remove the CFMEU, for instance, and insert another membership-based organisation. Imagine if the government was doing that to them. Because that is the precedent that this sets. And the precedent it sets is a future government where they decide that they do not like a membership-based organisation or civil society group that happens to offend the government in some way. Well, the government then, rather than take that organisation through the courts for any legitimate allegations of wrongdoing, can pass a piece of legislation based on this precedent that effectively annihilates that organisation.
What, you think the Liberals haven't thought of that? Max, here's the difference between you and Peter Dutton. He's a genius. You just think you're a genius. Give the press an excuse to blast the headline, "Rebel with a cause. Why Albo won't tell gypsy jokers on your bike." This country has been propagandised for 100 years to link the words union with organised crime. I've done an entire show about it. You can check it out here. You've been conditioned so that when you see the head of the teachers' union, you think,
Look at that What a f***ing bikey.
that'll sink 'em. No worries. You just ask Labor New South Wales. The press didn't give two shits that two Labor premiers fell on their sword trying to expel the corrupt elements of their party. The press argued for decades. Oh, can't let Labor back in power. They had a corrupt backbencher. What if that rot rises to the top? Better keep in the party that had 3 confirmed corrupt premiers. Give him an excuse. They'll make the traditional kick this mob out headline on election eve. Dutton needs to put on his cop uniform one last time. He'll get elected, now with the sole mandate of cleaning up the unions, where his administration period would absolutely be the Abbott and Costello reunion tour. I've been looking for another job in showbiz ever since I left North. Then after having just a single-term gasp of air, we'll be dragged right back down into the deep blue sea along with your year-on-year minimum wage increases, your year-on-year award wage increases. This is the Liberals' stated policy, to cut all of the Labor wins for workers' wages. And of course, none of that goes into the considerations of the Greens' so-called principle-based decisions. And you know why? Because decreased penalty rates, increased workplace deaths, these are all theoretical concepts to the average Greens voter base with their 150k a year jobs in fucking advertising or even worse.
It's actually my parents that have the advertising job. I don't do shit.
You know how every culture has an accent? Don't you think there's a Greens voice? Max Chandler Mather, Adam Band, they all have this nasally shriek. You know why? Because they're brats. What the Greens are is an unintended byproduct of Labor's success. They are the spoilt children of Whitlam, and they act like it with their "I'm mum's favourite." And as is the frequent pattern with their voter base, massive daddy issues. They all hate Paul Keating because he told them,
No, working's neoliberalism, boo!
like all Nepo babies, no gratitude or awareness that it was Dad that hooked them up with their sweet bullshit job by modernising the economy, which created the opportunity for these bullshit jobs to even exist in the first place. You're always saying, I don't criticise Labour. Here's one. They gave you cunts too much free time. Free time was a privilege that up until about 2 generations ago was given to a teeny group of inbreds and a few idiot savants they kept alive to do their accounting. That's it. To be part of the intellectual class, you basically had to be one of those navigator mutants in Dune. But now that a huge swath of the population has been lifted out of the working class thanks to Labor, I'm starting to think the Liberals were right. They really should have remained turnip farmers, because what have they done with their free time? They certainly haven't proved that they're competent enough to enter the ruling class. They're certainly not working. That's the last thing that's happening at a fucking fringe festival office, I can tell you now. They've entered the intellectual class by default and dumbed it down. It's the pseudo-intellectual class. Instead of it being filled with people whose brains work so well that it was basically a disability, it's now filled with a lot of...
I do a lot of shrooms, so my mind is expanded. I just don't do any reading, so there's nothing in it.
They're a subset of what Labor lifted out of the working class. I call it the superfluous class. It includes One Nation and independent voters. I'll get to them one day, but for now, I need you to understand that every time we ever talk about the Greens, we have a bunch of Scandinavians writing in to say we have this exact type of cunt in our country, fucking up our country in the exact same way, and it's because as much as Greens voters wish it wasn't true, to admit this would give them whinge withdrawals so fatal it might actually be the ego death of them. But thanks to Labor's reforms, Australia is basically one of these nations that they constantly say,
Oh, but Norway has mental health cabaret rebates.
Because Whitlam gave everyone a safety net, so it's really hard to fail, and Keating opened up the economy, so it's really easy to succeed, they got society working so benevolently and the economy working so efficiently that 30% of the population are the human equivalent of smog out of an aluminium smelter. They are the byproduct of a machine working so well that a third of the population are now externalities. They are externalities with a wine cooler in their house and some made-up high-earning job as a cultural sensitivity ambassador to occupy their worthless lives. You can see it in the voting patterns. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Business Party, Workers' Party, not Workers' Party. Now, obviously I have major gripes with the Business Party, but it does legitimately represent a valid, productive element of society. This doesn't. This is a tumour. This is a growth that ironically sits around all day tweeting that all business is bad, all mining is bad, in fact the economy, just all growth, bad. The only way you could ever think that is if it's not your job or business on the line when there's a recession. With these two constituencies, changes in policy materially impact them. The Labor Party criminalising wage theft, that's groceries and petrol for low-paid workers. And for employers, that's a fucking big bill to pay. We're talking up to $131 billion. That would suck having to pay that. But for the superfluous class, this argument is like you and your friends arguing over which Terminator film you like more. Whether you decide it's one or two doesn't really impact you, does it? You're still going to be on your $150k a year no matter what. This is what arguments about public housing and interest rates are to the superfluous class. It's like their little book club show that they used to love on the ABC, mildly mentally stimulating fodder to fill their endless free time. This is why their voters think it's awesome that the Greens stalled public housing projects, fucked up financing and time schedules for building these houses in the real world because the real world doesn't affect them. And if the real world doesn't affect them, then politics, which is the art of distributing resources in the real world, is as shallow and inconsequential as their tastes in music and clothes. It's fashion. That's it. It delivers no material benefit to them, and therefore it is as subject to change as their wardrobe. So, with that in mind, does it now make sense how the Greens can go from we like totally need to crack down on corruption, guys, to why are you cracking down on corruption, my guy? Then seemingly, jaw-droppingly hypocritically to anyone tethered to the real world, turn around and say that the reason they did this is because for us this is about principles, and the thing about principles is you should stick to them. And even more bizarrely, be rewarded by the supposedly principle base for it. It all makes sense when you understand this one point about the Greens, which is when they say we have principles, they're not talking about principles as in the concept, they're talking about principles TM. Principles is a brand to these cunts. They interact with it in the same way Leb cheeks interact with Louis Vuitton bags, thinking, this is bola. Their politics are purely designed to elicit the feeling of superiority. That's it. That's all the Greens have to do to win 15% of the vote, because society has been set up so well that that's all 15% of the population needs. Labor and Liberal have constituency that need things in the real world. Therefore, they have to deliver real world results to get votes from their base. All the Greens have to deliver their base is the feeling whenever they look at their little fucking bumper sticker on their Volvo. See, I'm principled. Now, this is obviously going to be baffling to anyone who hasn't existed in a limbo of unearned comfort since birth, but you really have to see the world through their perpetually annoying spectacles. If the only problem you have is that you know you should have made more of the free time that was afforded to you by mum and dad, but you didn't because you're not as special as what your biological mum and dad told you you were, so you filled a lot of that recreational time with recreational drug use, trying to discover why you were put here, and in the process, you've had moments of separation from your well-fed ego, so you are aware that if you died tomorrow, the world would keep spinning. And that understanding was only exacerbated by this class devoting an entire decade to the navel-gazing, pseudo-intellectual pursuit of being smug about atheism, until that too went out of fashion, leaving them feeling even emptier than ever before. And so now they're left trying to develop a sativa substitute for meaning, using the only tool afforded to them as members of the pseudo-intellectual class, which is vulgar interpretations of issues much bigger than themselves that they don't have the mental capacity or interest to properly grasp, mind you. They need fuzzy, highly simplistic understandings of words like capitalism and colonialism, and by simplified I mean the word. They just have to know the word exists. That's it. Don't ever ask them to define what they mean by that word. It'll cause them to have a mental breakdown, because that would interfere with what they need from the word, which is a completely malleable justification to feel both victimised.
Neoliberalism is the reason I'm not a Hollywood director.
But also, if you're a victim, you're not special and better than everyone. So they also need it to serve this double purpose of like fully getting how the machine works and stuff, you know, because they're so intellectual and because they get how evil the machine is, they're too pure to participate in the machine, you see? That's the reason they never made it to the elite class. It's because they couldn't possibly participate knowing how cooked everything is. This is why there is this constant need to rage against the machine. It's an ego defense to shelter them from their only real problem in life, which is that the machine doesn't fucking need them. They don't want to admit to themselves that they're useless shitheads, and the easiest way to do that is to pretend that everyone else is shit and shit light. So take note, budding political commentators, because this is exactly who you're pandering to. This entire ecosystem of think tanks, media outlets, boutique political parties, it is all geared to serve that class because that class has the money to sustain it. They have a need to sustain it too. There's a reason this group of people are both affluent and motivated enough to sit around watching streams of you deliberately misunderstanding negative gearing all day. And if you're going to do that with your life, please be aware of the service that you are providing these people, which is yet another form of pointless therapy for a class of people who don't need therapy and are basically going to therapy to eat up more of their endless free time. You're basically a facilitator running a very large Zoom support group for these victims of neoliberalism to vent that I fucking hate my dad. Now do you understand why you have to immediately flip from corruption is intolerable to corruption is tolerable as? It's because these people's values are entirely based on being out of the mainstream, because again, they're not part of the mainstream, and it's not because they're useless. No, it's because the mainstream is corrupt, you see? Corrupt is a shorthand for dirty, so by default of them not being in it, they're pure. This is why they're better than you without having to do anything. So you can see this immediate branding problem when Labor comes out tangibly proves in the real world, no, we have a zero tolerance policy to corruption in the Labor movement because unlike you, the Labor movement is actually important. All of a sudden, you can't feel superior for being against corruption anymore because that's mainstream now. Lucky for them, fashionista extraordinaire Max Chandler Mather comes out with his bold 2024 look, corruption is the new black. Now rest assured, this is all temporary. Once they move on to pretending to be superior about something else, they'll move straight back to being against corruption because it is like blacks in your wardrobe. Everyone needs some basics, and saying they're all corrupt, that's as basic bitch as it gets. Look, 70% of the population thinks it. Nothing else is going to make that size of the market all feel unique and smart because it really does have the vibe that only you and you alone have broken through the matrix, despite the fact that you couldn't be more of a goo battery if you tried. You don't get numbers like this on any opinion unless that opinion is completely manufactured. And so the question then becomes, who's the architect? Because it's certainly not Adam Ban, he's just the architect of using a dead dog to elicit pity donations. It's Howard. This video is long enough, but one day I'll go into his most profound legacy, which was permanently changing the very soul of this nation, but one of the main chakra realignments, if you will, was deliberately poisoning the body politic with this exact notion that all politicians are bastards. That is of huge benefit to the bastards. Why? Because if everyone's a bastard, no one's a bastard, are they? Look at Campbell Newman. What a bastard. What a massive, looks exactly like one of these things bastard. You know, last time the LNP were in, they sacked the entire Anti-Corruption Commission. But that's fine because Queensland's Anti-Corruption Commission doesn't have as many public hearings as the New South Wales one, and therefore it's shit, remember? Campbell Newman must have thought the same thing. The fact that he sacked the commission right around the time they were investigating his close relationship with the committee chairman Ken Levy, that's just a coincidence. And even if it's not a coincidence, it's perfectly fine, because all politicians are bastards, you see? This is why the LNP also cut the 2014 budget hearings. This is when parliamentarians are able to scrutinise all the government spending. This is very often where corruption is uncovered, because you get to ask the government, how come your mate was awarded a $100,000 contract to mow some fucking lawn around the governor's mansion? And then you get to see people like John blurt out, because what else are friends for, Stitch? Anyway, the Newman government shrunk those hearings from a week to 2 days. What, you think they did that because they figured out that the opposition didn't need that long to determine they were clean? Keep in mind, Queenslanders are such bozos, they reduced Labor to just 7 members. 7. They didn't have the manpower, let alone resources, to go through these hearings in 2 weeks, let alone 2 days. They were literally sprinting from hearing to hearing. But they were probably only sprinting because they were trying to make it look like they were trying to scrutinise the government. As we all know, this is the party that only sets up anti-corruption commissions to make it look like they're not bastards. Yeah, we know better, don't we? Even though we don't know shit. What percentage of Queenslanders do you think know that Queensland Labor not only implemented the Fitzgerald recommendations the first time around, in this very term they asked for seconds. In this term they forced Tony Fitzgerald out of retirement to give them more recommendations on how to be even more transparent. He came up with another 32 to prevent corruption in the public service in Queensland, but Queensland doesn't need to know that, do they? They've got a better transparency system, which is to kick the bastards out every few years. The party that implemented all 32 recommendations to increase transparency. Those are the bastards. And how do we keep those bastards honest? By replacing them with a bastard, because they're all bastards. Get it? This is why when you point out to Queenslanders, hey, you're about to elect a visible bastard. I mean, I kept calling him Bruz 2.0. Look what surfaced. You can't make this up. Another spaghetti-eating champion. I can't believe it. And they don't care. They know he's a bastard. It's not a point against his name at all that he's done very slimy things in every public office he's ever held, like selling cheap public land to his mates that didn't go to tender, locked off more public land to increase the value of his own fucking house. Now it really looks like he was trading while insolvent. You know what that means? That's like you knowing you don't have any money in your bank account and paying for your house to be painted, and when your check bounces, oh, it bounced? How peculiar, Stitch. And when asked about it, to his credit, David Spears did ask him. Here was his response.
Were you pursued in court for trading while insolvent?
No obligations and no findings, so that's a pretty...
Were you pursued in court for trading while insolvent?
No obligations and no findings, so I think that gives you your answer.
Was there a $200,000 payment to keep this confidential?
No obligations, no findings. Now, you've been around a long time. Read the report and you'll see that very clearly.
But that's all to be expected, because all politicians are bastards. Get it? Get how genius the "they're all bastards" framing is? Not only is there no punishment for being a bastard, there's no reward for not being a bastard. If everyone's a bastard, that also gives huge public credence to the coalition's entire purpose for gaining office, which is to privatise and dismantle the public service, because then there's fewer bastards, you see? It's amazing that they can be openly campaigning on what should be exclusively a Clark and Dawes sketch. Well, our message to the public is simple, Brian. We hate the government as much as you. Right, and what are you running for? The government. So you want to be the government because we hate ourselves and we think we should be taught a lesson by getting elected and having to put up with the bloody government. So you're running on a platform of, you hate us, we hate ourselves, we're on the same team, come on, let's punish the government. Which, if successful, would be you. Yes, I wouldn't want to be us if we were elected, Brian. Right, and you'll punish the government by privatising it, laying people off. We're talking about really ripping the government a new one, Brian, which would eventually make the government dysfunctional, leading to bad government. That's right. Right, so we elect you to punish us for being awful. Okay, so you can continue making the government worse and worse, so we keep getting re-elected to punish the government for getting worse and worse. You following? I don't think I am. Oh, you see, we're even terrible at communicating, Brian. We're really hopeless. And conversely, if people like the idea of dismantling a government, that gives a distinct disadvantage to the party that actually believes in government. It makes it harder when they are in government to do anything big. You know how everyone's always complaining, oh, the government doesn't do anything big anymore. Big moves require big trust, and there's now so little trust that we're at the ridiculous point where even setting up an anti-corruption commission is met with accusations of corruption, while every few years out comes a story about, oh, the public's lost faith with the politicians. Must be the politicians' fault. Nothing's ever the public's fault. Why? You remember this, commentators. This is a very valuable lesson. The public is your customer, and the customer's always right. The customer thinks they're corrupt, so you just keep feeding them that shit and shit light. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because you'll notice that a lot of these upstarts, they start out by copying me. And within about 6 months, you'll see them switch over to the I care about policy over party model. It's a dog whistle to this superfluous third of the population. Yes, this channel's going to feed us our only need in life, which for some reason is feel like we're smarter than literally everyone in Canberra. And they do that because they soon realise that what we did, learning things, standing up for something tangible, fighting real corruption, all a bit hard, really. It's also dangerous, life-threateningly so. And even worse than that, if you know what real corruption looks like, if you know how bad it actually is for society when it truly seeps in, you will, perish the thought, be appreciative of the fact that we live in one of the few countries on earth where a government is capable of being elected that isn't corrupt and does things in the public's interest, and you'll want to fight to keep that government in. And that's bad for business. So, you just enjoy the fruits of the labour of people like Adam Searle, Kate McClymont, Tony Fitzgerald, Bob Carr, Nathan Rees, Wayne Goss, Kevin Rudd. He was an integral part of the Goss government, just so you know. He remembers the dark days of Queensland well. Another Labor MP, John Newman, he lost his life fighting organised crime. But don't worry about him. He's lame now because the Greens have decided that organised crime's okay purely so they can feel superior. You just keep pretending that you don't notice that of those MPs that I just mentioned then, who really did sacrifice a lot for this country, they all belong to one side of politics. You keep denigrating them as all corrupt bastards. Keep eroding their deserved public standing. You'll only benefit from it. Not only will you not receive the same treatment from actual corruption like we did, as remember, you're only pretending they're corrupt. They're not going to try and silence you by any means necessary like they tried to silence us. Also, your audience will praise you endlessly with, "Wow, this is so well researched, very not biased because you said that also." You'll also be heaped with mainstream media appearances, deals and praise instead of open hostility and character smears. And why? Because you are proudly, ignorantly and smugly pushing the "they're all bastards" frame set up by the bastards to keep the bastards in. You know, over the last couple of years we've done dozens of stories no one else will touch, and that's despite being off air for a huge chunk of this year because we were busy trying not to be killed. Why? Why were we being killed? Because unlike every other one of these imposters, we walk the walk. We fight real corruption. We don't just pretend it's there to attract clicks from cunts. The reason the others won't touch these stories is because publishing them would piss off people they need favours from to get sucked off in interviews by other exchangeable avatars with the same unique, annoying Dame Edna glasses.
How did you develop this delightful, some would say, wicked irreverence?
I wouldn't want to be in the same room as these people, let alone be interviewed by them. Keep them. We're busy. We've been threatened legally multiple times this year. We've set up an environmental defence trust. That's huge. That will absolutely go on to save entire ecosystems, which is more than any of these assholes who just keep repeating over and over, "We need a hung parliament because special interests that would benefit from a hung parliament tell me it's a good way to check special interests." That one act alone is more public service than any of these leeches will ever perform in their entire lives. But for us, that is a side note to the fact that we also got the Terror Police in New South Wales disbanded. Think about that. Amidst everything else, thanks to the efforts of those that donated and XD Law, who as usual pulled off another miracle win. They are truly the magicians of the legal system. This year, we got the New South Wales Gestapo disbanded. I wonder what all the socially stunted cowards on Reddit who spend their worthless lives anonymously bitching about us did with their year. What public benefit can you point to that the so-called public broadcaster did with their $1 billion a year budget? And you know what else? In terms of public benefit, disbanding the New South Wales Secret Police, really just a side quest. That's right. We did two things this year that are much bigger than that. Both of those things will have to go to the grave with us though, because we can't ever publicly say what they were. But if you knew what they were, I think you'd agree. We deserve to retire just on those. I mean, Jesus, the amount of public service that we've done over the years and received nothing for it but trashing by a bunch of smug cunts that'll never do anything with their lives but leech. I mean, we have saved hundreds of thousands of animals from starving in the bushfires. Helped this man rebuild his house because there's a legend that regenerates bushland. Helped set up breeding programs for 2 species going extinct. Are responsible for millions of trees being planted. Hundreds of millions of dollars being taken out of fossil fuel projects, tens of thousands of union memberships, caused the previous New South Wales coalition to fracture. Just in case you forgot, according to this guy, we made him quit apparently, his words, and then got the New South Wales Libs kicked out. What, you think that was because of the press, of which there wasn't a single story in the entire country about the Deputy Premier caught on tape laughing about using hundreds of millions of tax dollars as his own personal re-election fund? All I'm saying is, sorry, we're more interested in supporting those that enter public life for the public's benefit instead of tarnishing their name purely to attract the perverse clicks of a bunch of man-children passively consuming us, risking our lives in between gooning sessions and cutting up 30-second clips of themselves doing unimpressive kills on Fortnite. These channels aren't. They're interested in retention rates. We're interested in results. And if you want to see that list expand, then by all means, feel free to sign up to our Patreon. Frankly, I think we deserve it. I don't take any money from it. All goes to staff's wages. I've got my live show to keep me fed. So chuck us the price of a decent coffee a month. I think it's worth it. If, however, you're looking for people to keep playing into a frame that you think is your own, designed purely to make results in the real world even harder than they already are to achieve, also you can feel like you get it, consult your local Whinge dealer. I'll be burning to a crisp in the meantime.